Welcome to the Nitty Gritty Law Library. This is a library which encourages the government through the courts to obey the law. So I hope the government spies that are watching this program take note of that. So this is the scepter of authority, and I think in ancient times it was very effective. You bonked somebody on the head if they messed around with the king. Anyway, the Nitty Gritty Law Library is dedicated to educating people as to what the real law is. In the schools where attorneys go for 4 years, they learn all about the equity system. But it turns out we have two systems, and the other system is called common law. And the common law supersedes the equity law. In fact, if you set up a court of record, the court of record is actually higher than the United States Supreme Court. It's actually the People's Court. And why the People's Court? Because if you look at the Constitution of the United States of America, I'm sorry, I meant to say the Constitution for the United States of America, you'll see the preamble says, and I'm shortening it a little bit, we the people of the United States, in order to accomplish this laundry list of tasks, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now you notice the preamble started off with United States, but then it was for the United States of America, which is 4 words. So the United States of America is a separate corporation. It's actually a trust. And by the way, all corporations are trusts. So it's a trust. And because we are the creators, we're above the corporation. We're above the Constitution. So we the people ordained and established it. I haven't been able to find anything in the Constitution that says that the thing that we created can override its creator, which is us. And that's where our sovereignty comes from. So this is a secular sovereignty. Now a lot of people like to talk about God and that God is sovereign, but we're staying away from religion. We're being very practical, down to earth. We look and see it in black and white, what it is, and this is what gives us strength in our arguments. So we are sovereign relative to the government. In fact, if you look in the California Government Code, now the California Government Code is a code specifically written for the government, okay? And there's a section in there, which we'll come into later in the lecture, which I'll quote word for word. It says, the people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. Well, that's pretty clear to me. So, with all that in mind, I'm going to go into an organized, structured explanation of what this whole system is about. But we can't go directly to the middle. We have to start with the beginning. And the beginning really involves history. So, on the website, if we go straight to, we click on Start Here, and on the website, it takes us to the foundation. All right. Well, the website speaks for itself here. What you're seeing here is instructions on how to read the website. But basically, what it's saying is that if you're an attorney, you better open up your mind. Okay, because this is, when in the law schools, what they do is they only teach equity law. They learn statutes, codes, rules, policy maybe. And by the way, statutes and codes are not law. They're actually equity rules. Okay? And you can think of them, you have this legislature making up all these rules. That's the rule of man. Whereas the rule of the people is God's law. And in fact, it's been said that a jury is actually God's representatives when they judge a case. And I know that my own experience on juries, when I've done jury duty, was everybody actually tried to come to the right decision. Now, that didn't mean they were all smart. I mean, we had smart jurors and we had dumb jurors, but the integrity was unquestionable. Everybody was honestly trying to come to the right decision, which is why I prefer a jury of 12 to a jury of 1, which is what a judge is. Okay? So, anyhow, the attorneys are only taught equity. But if you're not an attorney, then you're already part of the unwashed, okay, from the attorney's point of view. And but you're open-minded, and so you can learn. It's really difficult to teach somebody when they already know. And that's the problem I run into with attorneys, quite frankly. So you go down the list here of the various factors, and what I'll do is expand this. There we are. So I like this little saying up here by a quote of Marcus Tullius Cicero. He said, "Wise men are instructed by reason, men of less understanding by experience, the most ignorant by necessity, and the beasts by nature." So I'll tell you, that's what led to this. There was a fellow by the name of Roger Elvick who I learned a lot from, and he was the one who actually gave me the start. I wasn't aware of this until he said what he had to say, and even though I didn't understand him, I at least got the spirit of what he was saying, and that led to my own studies. But one time I was helping a fellow, and he was in jail, but what he did, he was in the municipal court, and he went to the higher court, the superior court, and he appointed me as a special master. And a special master is basically given authority to do specific tasks. He's not allowed to make decisions, but he is allowed to do research, okay? And so I could take depositions and things for the court. So anyway, I got a jailhouse rumor that on Friday he was going to be in court. So I wrote up a preliminary order, and I went to the municipal court, and I went in chambers before the court started. And I was dressed like an attorney, so it was pretty easy. You know, I had a vest and pinstripe suit. I played the part. And so when I went to the judge, I explained to the judge that the reason I wanted to see him was because I was bringing in an unusual procedure. And I had an order from the Superior Court appointing me as a special master, and that's why I was here. And he said, okay, he wanted to hear a little more. And I started to tell him, and while I was starting to tell him, in comes the prosecutor. He looks at me, and obviously I'm a fellow attorney. So he starts talking to the judge, and guess what? He's talking about this case. Totally illegal, okay? I was legal because I was a representative of a higher court, but he was an attorney representing a party, and he wanted an audience with the judge, you know, without the other side, right? So the judge was no dummy, and in retrospect, he was actually a very sharp guy, and he actually had integrity. I know this because of my experiences with other judges and how this guy responded, okay? But he said, he says, wait a minute. He says, this is getting too complicated. We better go into open court. And so he shuffled both of us out of there, but at least he had warning that of who and what I was about. So when he called the case, among maybe a couple dozen other cases, I stepped up between the prosecutor and the public defender. And the judge was actually listening to me, okay? And he wanted to know why I was there, and I explained it. And we had a little bit of a conversation. At one point, I pointed out that there were common law rights at issue. And the judge said, well, the common law is not recognized in this court. And I agreed with him. I said, you're correct. However, in Miranda versus Arizona, that case, the Supreme Court said that where substantive rights were concerned, there shall be no rulemaking. Well, substantive rights is a key phrase which means common law rights. So, and he agreed with me on that. Of course, I had case law backing me up, and case law is actually, again, not real law, it's just equity law, okay? So he agreed with me, and then he said to me, he said, well, what do you want me to do? And that was a trick question, because I can't tell him to do anything. What I said was, it is the wish of the Superior Court that the municipal court release jurisdiction to the Superior Court until such time as the issues in the Superior Court are settled. And he said, I will do that if you will give me the order in writing. So I said, well, okay. I said, I have it half written, and I didn't know how things were going, but I said, if you will recess the case, I will complete the order and deliver it on recall. And so he suspended the operations, and I was rushing around writing and going to copy machines and all that sort of stuff. And when the case was recalled, I stepped up and I read the order to him. No, I take that back. I'm sorry. I gave it to him through the marshal, of course. And he actually read it, and then he ordered it filed into the record. And that was the end of that session, okay? But he recognized who and what I was, because I had given him also a copy of my authorization papers, okay? I was appointed. And the reason I got appointed, or we were able to pull this off, was because in the Superior Court, although he was in jail, he was asserting his sovereign rights. And it was his court. He was the plaintiff. In a court of record, you are the owner of the court if you're in your sovereign capacity. So that's how we got away with it. A little humorous moment in that process was when the prosecutor stood up and said, you know, we came to a pause, and the prosecutor said, Your Honor, who is this man? I don't know what he's doing here. I don't know who he is. The judge stared the prosecutor down. He didn't say a single word. He just stared. The prosecutor sat down. He turned his head toward me, and he picked up on our conversation as though that prosecutor didn't even exist. And up until that moment, in accordance with this, wise men are instructed by reason, up until that moment, I was running on pure logic. I had no prior case law. I had no experience with doing such a thing. I knew logically I was right but I didn't know how it was going to go, and my knees were shaking. And when that prosecutor stood up without effect, and that judge turned back to me as if that prosecutor had never spoken, I knew I was in. I had it knocked. And so it was great. So anyway, yes, you have to have the courage to believe your logic, okay? And hopefully you have matching intelligence. You've got to have intelligence and logic. This is not a game for a person with limited intelligence, believe me. So I always tell people who, in the course of conversation, I figure they're not that sharp. I tell them, go get an attorney. I know it's not the best route to go, but on the other hand, they're going to get slaughtered if they go in by themselves because they just don't have it together. So it's the least worst recommendation that I give them. So if you are inclined to help somebody, I'm warning you. I tell people, look, I'm no more interested in your case than you are. They have to do their homework. They have to understand this. And if they don't have the understanding, they don't belong in this game. So the prosecutors, well, I was talking to an attorney one time. He was an old guy with lots of gray hair. And he was kind of lamenting about the fact that in olden days, you could sit with the prosecutor and you could work out details. You know, he went back and forth and you could work out. He says now they're looking for notches in their gun. You know, they just want to win, no integrity. And so he was retiring, so he wasn't going to pursue that point, but he didn't like it the way things went. So, and we're finding that, I find in dealing with attorneys that are that way. And of course the attorneys become judges. You know, one time I was in court and we had a motion going on. And the judge said he denied the motion. And then he said, I've got a good idea. And he came up with a ruling on an issue that wasn't even part of the motion. And of course it was against me because I didn't have an attorney. You know? But that shows you how it works. Usually they're more subtle in how they do it. And as one attorney told me, he says, when I was making motions, and some of my motions were actually being successful, he says, oh yeah, he says that judge will probably give you everything on all of your motions, but in the final judgment you'll lose. And that's how it turned out to be. But by the time I got to that point, I had come up to speed on this stuff, and I was able to issue an order to overrule the judge. And you have that power when you have a court of record and you're the plaintiff or the counter plaintiff. We'll get into that. So the next thing that I find that is very applicable to this, and I take it to heart, is the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And believe me, that's a tough one. I talk to so many people. They tell me that they want to win, but when you give them the solution, they figure out a way to keep the fight going. So some people just don't quite get it. They're very intelligent. I could see that, but they don't get it, and they're hard-headed. You know, they're going to beat this thing, and they get beaten because they're not sensitive to their opportunities to win. Or if you give them the opportunity and try to explain it, they do everything to keep the fight going and not win. So this is really critical. I know it comes out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was written by an author some time back. But boy, that is really a condensation of everything. You gotta recognize when you can't win. During the war between France and Russia, Napoleon was the leader at that time, and he had what was at that time considered the most powerful army in the world. And the Russian general had a bunch of lieutenants that wanted to go in and really attack the French army. Well, he kept them under control. He wouldn't let them do a full attack. Instead, what he did was as the French army was advancing, he was burning the countryside, destroying the whole area around the pathway, so that the French had to have long supply lines. They could not live off the land, which normally they would have. So he just killed everything, burned everything. And he kept retreating. At night they would harass the French army, but did not engage in true one-to-one combat. Eventually, they retreated all the way back to Moscow, and the French army was approaching. But there was a little problem. The Russian winter set in. There was mud everywhere. The cannons sunk down into the mud. They couldn't move them. The horses weren't strong enough. And eventually, and the supply lines, they couldn't supply because of the bad snow conditions, mud mainly. And Napoleon had to give up. He couldn't keep his army going. As a matter of fact, a lot of Russian words are actually French words. Because a lot of soldiers, they stayed there. Can't beat them, you join them, right? I guess that's the philosophy. Anyway, so I guess they recognized the things they couldn't change, So anyway, I can't emphasize that enough. This serenity prayer has served me so well, and I'm reminding people all the time, well, this is a point that you can't win, or this is a point you can win. And I have to actually pound on some people to get them to recognize the difference. You would think it would be obvious, but nope. So the next point is, in your legal career, you understand that what you're doing is you're taking on a new lifestyle if you're getting involved with the law. This is not just something you're going to do a battle and win. It's a treacherous pathway, and you have to acknowledge this website is an attempt to make you aware of the tools that you have in law, but it's not complete by a long shot. It really is. You need to talk these over with lots of different people who are doing the same thing that you are, and don't write off attorneys. If they're not representing you, and if they're not into the court system with your case, they're actually quite honest. They'll tell you stuff. Now, they don't understand common law. I have a good friend. He won $1 million judgment just recently. He's an attorney, really nice guy, down to earth, and he absolutely does not understand what I'm saying. He tells me I'm just totally bonkers. But I know it's not bonkers because I've actually issued court orders removing judges, not removing them, but removing their orders that they issue in the case. And I've actually gone to the extent of issuing bench warrants, Now, by the way, they never get arrested. But my objective is not to arrest them. My objective is to change their behavior. And we've been pretty successful at that, doing it that way. Because when they see they could go to jail, they don't know. See, the biggest thing is fear of the unknown. If you can bring a threatened tsunami of litigation, they don't know if they want to take that risk. And by the way, as long as I'm mentioning that, what is your objective when you're in court? Let me tell you something. You're best off if your objective is not to win. Your objective is to run their costs up. I like to say burn their budgets. You see, all government agencies have to meet budget restraints, okay? If they don't meet a budget restraint, they're on the carpet to justify why they're spending all this money. Every time you put in a motion, you're costing somebody $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, depending on how complex your motion is. You understand 10 motions could be $10,000 to $30,000 in cost. And the reason it costs them is because there's no way they can get around paying their attorneys. Okay? The bureaucrats that you're doing battle with, they don't know the law. They just have their pathway they follow. And if it goes awry, they don't know what to do. So they call their attorneys. And you make a motion, they're not going to answer the motion. They're going to talk to the attorney. And he gets paid. So you want to burn their budgets. On several occasions, I've heard of people, and I know at least one, that they made it so expensive with the IRS that they get a letter from the IRS saying that we've, researched it and we find that you're right in your position, and so therefore you don't owe anything to the IRS or to the government, and if anything changes, please let us know. Fat chance, right? But anyway, yeah, because why? You just burn their budget. You burn up that money. And these collection officers, they have supervisors, and there are questions like, well, why haven't you solved this yet? Okay, you said it was an easy case in the beginning, and here you are, $30,000 or $100,000 later, burned out of our budget. And their jobs are at stake then. Oh, by the way, a little memory crossed my mind just now. Back in the 70s, I think it was, the IRS offices had banners up around high on the walls. Seizure fever. That's what it said. Seizure fever. That was the thing. We're going to go out and seize stuff and sell it, and get money. And so that's the deal. They get, it's my understanding that the collection agencies actually get perks on what they collect. And they also pay a percentage to whistleblowers. If you turn somebody in for non-payment of taxes, if they collect money, you get a percentage. Okay? Well, they're just trying to make the system fair. They don't want to get these leads for free. Okay? Anyway, so this leads to the next subject, which is health. You cannot be an angry person. You cannot get angry at all. Okay? Don't do that. University of California in Irvine did a research on brain power. And what they found was that if you were a happy person, the brain caused certain hormones to be generated which built health. If you were an angry person, the brain caused certain hormones to be delivered that increased your power and strength but destroyed your health. So if you're going to be an angry person, you're headed for bad health. Okay? You've got to keep the stress low. You've got to be a happy person. In my case, yeah, I feel pangs of anger sometimes when I'm working on a case. But that's just passing. And when I'm not working on a case, I don't even think about cases. Okay? Having said that, sometimes I do. But I mean, it's hard to ignore things that are unjust, unfair, that type of thing. That's my hot point, is when there's unfairness. And so, but you can't let that drill into you, because if you do, you lose. There's a second reason. Anybody here buy a new car or a new used car? Okay. Did you notice that model car was everywhere? Yeah. Okay, what's going on? Well, what's going on is that your brain has been sensitized to that particular one. They were there all the time. They're not new. But you're sensitized to it. When you're angered, your mind tends to focus down on the issue that's causing anger. And it blocks your sensitivity to your opportunities to win. So you want to be a generally happy person. I like to tell jokes. I think you might have heard a couple of them. Okay? So yeah, and it's because this is intentional. When I was about 18 years old, up until that time, I was pretty much an angry person. I remember a kid came up to me one time when I was in 5th grade, and he said, "You want to fight?" And so I hit him. Yeah, well, and he was showing aggression, and then he apologized. He said he thought he was expecting me to say yes, and he would say, "Go join the army." It was a joke for him. Well, it didn't work that time. But I was an angry person, okay? And when I was about 18 years old, I don't know why, I don't know how. All I know is I got the thought that I should be a happy person. I didn't want to be angry. It took about 5 years to actually change my automatic mood, because my automatic mood was being angry or, taking offense or something like that. It took about 5 years, so that means I was about 23, 24 years old before I started smoothing out. And by the way, I still had a lot of rough edges. But, experience, if you get knocked down enough, you tend to if you're intelligent enough to realize that there's a lesson there, then you can actually improve yourself. But it's slow. It did take me about 5 years to go from being a hot-tempered type of person to a person who still hot-tempered once in a while, but at least I was under control, self-control. So you want to be, as much as possible, you need to cultivate an attitude that's positive. Not because you're in la-la land, but because you actually want to present that. And I'll tell you, things go smoother. I go into a clerk's office, and my favorite joke, you've probably heard it on other tapes, my favorite joke when I go up, and they change clerks all the time, it never grows old. But I'll say, did you hear about the case the other day in court where this guy was fighting his parking ticket and making a big federal deal out of it? And they say, no. I said, yeah. I said, the judge was really getting impatient with him. And the judge said to him, "Sir, didn't you see the sign?" And he said, "Yes, Your Honor, I saw it. It said, fine for parking." Okay? And that's a great icebreaker. They love it. The sheriffs love it. Cops, city cops love it. Everybody loves that one. Attorneys love it. You know, anybody who's of a legal mind, that is a sure winner joke. And it's a great icebreaker. You just, because, again, you want to put up that front of being a friendly person. You know, you're not threatening their jobs or threatening their peace of mind. And it works, and they become quite helpful sometimes. And I'll get into that. But you see, health is the number one thing. I took a course one time, actually I took it 2 times, on alternative health. And I will say this, if you're going to drink water, drink distilled water. Okay? Why? The reason is because if you take a glass of water and you pour sugar into it, eventually it becomes so saturated that any more sugar just settles to the bottom. It won't dissolve. Okay? There's a limit to how much water can carry. And that works on a sliding scale. If you have a little bit dissolved, then you have a lot that can still be dissolved. If you have a lot dissolved already, you have less. So what this means is when you drink distilled water, the water can carry more food from the stomach to the cells. Not only that, after it dumps out the nutrients, it now will take more waste matter from the cells away, deliver it to the kidneys and liver or wherever. So when you drink distilled water, you've immediately gotten rid of the pre-saturation. Things like mineral water, spring water, whatever it is, you've taken away some of the capacity of the water to dissolve whatever needs dissolving. So, and just as a side note, a really important thing I learned was that if somebody's having a heart attack, a lot of heart attacks, a major part of heart attacks, comes from too much contamination in your blood from various things, okay? And if somebody's having a heart attack, hopefully it's not a heart attack because of a valve failure or a burst artery, something like that. But if they're having a heart attack, give them water, any kind of water, but preferably distilled water. And because you're diluting out what's stressing the heart. Okay? So that's just a little emergency thing. If the person is cognizant, you know, not unconscious, yeah, give them water if they're having a heart attack, and hopefully that's a good short-term emergency situation until you can get real help. So that's just a little side note of what I learned. So that's important enough to me. I put it in the website. If you have an upset stomach, you know, that can be pretty bad. Let me explain that. Your stomach is upset probably because of things being put in the stomach that it's not ready for. For example, the bile, you know, coming from, what organ is that? The bile? The gallbladder, right. Comes from the gall. Or it is gall that's put in there. Well, if you don't have any food, your stomach's going to feel kind of upset, okay? But the real deal is this. The stomach produces one of the 3 strongest acids that exist in the world, hydrochloric acid. If you feel an upset stomach, you're being misled if you're being told you have an acid stomach. Your stomach is designed to handle the world's most strong acid. Okay? The problem is a couple of things. One of them, like I said, the gallbladder, too much gall. You like that saying, you have the gall to do something? But anyhow, you take what you take for that, if you have an upset stomach, is hydrochloric acid pills. It's called betaine hydrochloride. You can get it in any health food store. You take 1 or 2 tablets, and preferably you take it with food and water. But what that does is that acidifies the stomach and calms it down. People who have a constant upset stomach, typically it's because they're not producing acid. And the older you get, the less acid you produce. So what happens is that when there's less acid, the stomach, which is the first defense against infection, allows the bacteria to grow, and the byproduct of, when everything goes to the bathroom, okay? So when bacteria goes to the bathroom, it's alkaline, the opposite of acid. And so they push these products like Pepto-Bismol, okay? These are, Bufferin is another one. That's a special chemical that's unique, that if your stomach is too acid or if it's too alkaline, it tends to bring it to neutral, okay? But neutral's not what you need, unless, like I said, if it's too acid. But what you need typically is more acid. Somebody has ulcers. Your stomach lining is designed to resist acid. When you have alkaline stomach, your stomach it starts deteriorating. It's bad for the lining of your stomach. And the interesting thing about an alkaline stomach is that when you belch and you get a little stomach fluids up, alkali burns too. But everybody thinks it's acid. No, it's alkaline. So if you have ulcers, acidify your stomach. Those ulcers are because it was too alkaline. The bacteria is flourishing, and they really cause problems.
So does that mean alkaline water is bad? It's alkaline water?
Well, alkaline water, some people find it helpful. The thing is, you don't know until you try something because of the variety of humanity. You can't make a blanket rule. But I have found in my case, every once in a while, I have gotten a stomach upset. Take a pill or two with water and maybe a little food. In about 15 minutes, I'm fine. About the time it takes for that pill to dissolve and neutralize and overpower the alkali, okay? So that's my 2 cents worth, maybe worth 1 cent, okay? These are just life experience that I've had.
Helps you in court.
Say again?
Helps you in court too.
It helps you in court too, because if you can go in with a good feeling and positive, and listen, not everybody's your enemy. Let me get into the next point, which is what this is leading into, is attitude. Having a positive attitude, even in the face of negativity, is a real asset. I had one help that I was helping. He was in a Midwestern state. And she had learned how to issue orders. And she issued an order to the clerk, telling the clerk that the clerk had to perform for, do some file paper or whatever it was. It happened that she went to school with this clerk when they were kids. It's small town in the country. And they argued all morning. Friendly argue, and she made sure that she preserved the good relationship she had with the clerk. And but Friday afternoon, she went home. She was unsuccessful to get the clerk to change. In the Saturday mail, she got a letter from the clerk telling her to come in and file the paper, because the clerk did the research and found the specific code that authorized it. There's a federal code, I'm sorry, I can't remember the number, but in Title 28, which is the federal rules relating to civil cases, it says that you can issue, or the clerk, you can issue to the clerk a mandamus, that's an order to do something, to make her do a duty owed to the plaintiff. Now get that. The defendant can't do that. Only the plaintiff can. Well, go back to common law. Who owns the court? Who's the sovereign here? Not the defendant. So the defendant has to go to the appellate court and get that court to order the clerk to do, or whatever, you know. So that was a real eye-opener for me, because I didn't know that. And when she called me up and told me that, I thought, wow, we were right all along. You know, our logic told us that we were right, but we really didn't have that strong a backup on it. And there it was, in black and white, in Title 28 of the United States Code. So attitude is very, very important. In Thailand, there was a bit of a problem there. The normal thing is that if the government didn't like you, you just disappeared at midnight. Nobody ever saw you again, never heard you again. And not only that, but the government was really, really getting embarrassed, because back in the 1970s, I think it was, somewhere around there, plus or minus a decade, these Buddhists were parking themselves into the middle of a public square, dousing themselves with kerosene and setting themselves on fire, okay, in protest to the government. And this was internationally very embarrassing to the government. I mean, it created problems for the government. Well, the head of the Buddhists there had a minimal security force. He had some security people who would guard him, but nothing big enough to protect him from the government if the government decided to go after him. Now, there was speculation as to how was it possible that this person could go around the country creating all this international havoc for the government, and he didn't disappear. Well, the answer was he was just too damn likable. He attended functions. He was the leader, so, you know, he got invited to functions. Everybody loved him. He just had a personality everybody loved. Nobody wants to hurt somebody they like, okay? So it's very important when you go to court and you're dealing with clerks. You know, the clerks talk to the judges too. When you're dealing with clerks, you're dealing with attorneys, always friendly, okay? Always nice to them. And there's only one attorney that might deserve an exception to that I met. He was a solid gold rat. I mean, he did everything that you shouldn't do in law to win a fight. I made a motion one time, and it turned out that one day after I made the motion, he had put some paper in not related to the motion, and his secretary mailed it to me. I was served with this, whatever it was. But packed with this was the original motion I made against him or his client. Okay? And I said, that was interesting. Now, I tend to be very professional in dealing with the opposition. If he had called me up and said, you know, I can't find this motion anywhere. I don't know. We lost it in our paperwork. And if he asked for more time, I would have given him more time to answer. But he remained silent. When I went to court, in California, you will find outside the court doors, you'll find a list of all the people that are going to be heard that day. And my name wasn't on the list. So I went in and I said to the clerk, I said, I was scheduled for this date, but I don't see it here. And she said, oh, well, the plaintiff called in yesterday and asked for it to be taken off calendar. I said, well, I'm the plaintiff and I didn't call. Uh-oh. Well, that put them in a bad spot. The judge had to hear it anyway, because here I am, the plaintiff, saying, no, I didn't call. Not about to. And obviously I was very credible. I'm not going to call my own case off calendar, okay? Well, you know what happened. It's obvious. He called in and pretended to be me. He didn't have the integrity to just call up and say, I'm in a tight spot. I don't know what I did, whatever. So, and by the way, this was before we had internet, because now you can just go on the court website and look at the docket sheet, and you can see if somebody filed a motion. It's very easy. And I recommend that, in fact, I strongly order you all, if you have a hot case going where you don't trust the opposition at all, check your docket sheet once every 2 weeks, okay, without fail. Because if they file something but did not serve you, but claim they did, you typically have, on a motion, I think it's 20 or 21 days to answer. So if you check it every 14 days, worst case, you will have 6 days to respond. So you'll never be caught flat-footed, okay? Check it every 2 weeks. And that saved me sometimes too, I've had some pretty nasty oppositions. So anyway, that's just a little footnote to the conversation here. But the thing is you want to be nice to everybody. You want to be a positive person. You go into the court, good morning, Your Honor, he's your best friend. The opposing attorney, hi, how you doing? Tell him a joke or something. It's just professional. It's nothing personal, right? That really pays. Because anger and hate creates a lot of energy in the opposition. You go in there with a nasty face, an ugly attitude, that just gives them more energy, okay? That drives them on to do illegal things. They're going to do illegal things anyway, but when the energy's not there, they're not so focused on you. And so they don't like to hurt you. You're a nice guy, right? That really is a psychological factor. So don't let your anger show through. And instead, not only not let it show through, be a nice person, be happy yourself, and make it a habit. Anger is actually a habit. I don't know if you realize that, but it's actually a habit, and it's correctable, and I'm proof that it's correctable, okay, because of my young experience. Okay, so much about attitude, all right? Now, there's a lecture here about common law. It lasts about 4 hours. We won't go into that here. But what is common law? Common law, the ultimate definition of common law, is custom and usage. It is law that's been there since time immemorial. Nobody knows when it got created. All we know is this is how we do things in our society. Okay? That's common law. I know for a while in Australia they had common law quite strong. A friend of mine traveled to Australia, and he was talking to a cop there, and he says, well, what if somebody murders somebody? Is that wrong? And the cop said, well, I don't know. Couldn't predict it. I mean, sure, it seems wrong, but is it a crime? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And there was one case that I heard about where this two guys, there was the father who had a daughter, and the daughter married a man, and the son-in-law and the father hated each other. And they both worked as cooks in the same facility. And it was a small town area, so everybody knew everybody. And he would say aggravating things. He would use four-letter words when he would explain to his father-in-law that he had sex with the daughter. But he'd use four-letter words. And ha, 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 what are you going to do about it, you know? Well, they were married, so it was legal, but it was aggravating. Well, apparently the father took offense at that because one day he chopped up the son-in-law in a lot of little pieces, okay? And it got to trial, and he was found not guilty by the jury. Local jury, everybody knew anyway, you know. So under the common law, well, what is a crime, okay? So under the equity law, you have the district attorney who has the discretion to not prosecute. If he won't prosecute you, you can get away with anything. And it happens, by the way. So the law isn't that solid. There is actually flexibility in the juries and in the district attorney. The juries are they have the ability to bring the heart into the law. So the law is heartless, the written law, and that's what this is. So in equity, they have the statutes and codes, which are equity rules. They're not law at all, okay? And they're made up by a legislature, the law of man. Well, that's not the law of God. The law of God is the common law. And now I'm going to bring in a religious factor. I do not put any religious, anything religious in any of the papers I write. But we have a biblically based system of law. If you go to Genesis chapter 3, verse 22 or 23, you know the story about how Adam ate of the fruit of knowledge because of Eve, and God discovers this. Well, in verse 22, God says, "Behold, the man is become as one of us, in that he knows good and evil," knows the difference. So, by that act of eating from the tree of knowledge, man became, and I'm saying man generically, you know, all of humanity, man became equal to God in the knowledge of good and evil. And that's a very useful point, because in the Inquisition, there were priests who were determining that certain people were, they were blasphemous and that they're doing wrong, but that was okay because they could burn them at the stake, okay? So, but if there had been actual lawfulness on the part of the priests, what you could have said is that, well, who are you to tell me I'm doing something wrong? And of course the priest would say, well, God sent me to tell you. Okay? Well, if I'm his equal, my response would be, well, thank you for the advice. I'm very respectful of the advice I get, but in my opinion, I'm doing just fine. Okay? And that should be the end of it. Because of that, that is not a command from God. That's just an opinion. Okay? And you have your opinion, and he himself, with a capital H-E, he himself has said that you're his equal. The man is become as one of us. Okay? Now, we're not like God in other aspects of the universe. You know, I've had a little trouble creating another planet and that sort of thing, even though I dream of it. But you have that equality. And then you go over to Paul's first epistle to Timothy. And in Timothy, he wrote a letter. And he said in the first chapter, is along about verse, 7 or 8 or 5 or 6, somewhere in there. He says, the law is not for the lawful man, but for the lawless. Now, my interpretation of that is the law he's speaking of that's not for the lawful man is the written law. You've got the Ten Commandments, that's the written law, okay, if you're thinking in religious terms. So the law is not for the lawful person. In other words, the written law is not for the person who obeys the law in his heart. Okay? So you are, that law is not, the Ten Commandments were not written for you. Why? You do the right thing anyway. You see? But if you're a person who ignores it, then that's what we have the written law for. Now, to show how that works, let's say you're doing 25 miles an hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. Okay? And a little kid runs out from between the parked cars and you kill him. Are you responsible? In our system, you're not. No intent. Okay? You were a lawful person. You were actually better than lawful. You're going below the speed limit. You're not responsible because you are a lawful person. And nobody would ever make a big deal out of that unless they are insane themselves. So, look at the difference between that and the Middle East. There's an American one time was in the Middle East. He was conducting American business with the Saudi Arabians. He went to one of the official offices of Saudi Arabia. He parked in the parking lot, and his car was the only car in the parking lot. And he went in and conducted his business. When he came out, he found that one of the natives had come around the curve too fast, couldn't navigate it, went off the road into the parking lot and hit his car. So it got to court. And the judge said that, well, from the point of view of the native, it was an accident. He didn't do it intentionally, right? But from the point of view of the American made a specific decision to park where he parked. And because he parked there, and it was his decision, he was responsible. This is not the American way, as you can probably know. So, and I go back to the biblical reasons, you know, the combination of Genesis and 1 Timothy. Okay? So, this is where your authority comes from. You have to have, as it says in 1 Timothy, you have to have faith unfeigned. You have to be genuine. Okay? It's not a question of form, it's a question of substance. All right? Who and what are you really? So, anyway, all I'm saying is that the common law basically comes down to public opinion. It comes down to how do we do things. How many of you have actually read the vehicle code? You have? Okay, you got 2 out of all of you. Well, there's an example of the common law in action, because the rest of you are going according to the general opinion of everybody else. Everybody drives on the right side of the street, huh? Why? Well, it just seems like the right thing to do here. In England, it's the left side of the street, but but nevertheless, that's the common law. The statutory law, you never read the statutory law. You never read the codes, except for two of you. Okay? So, I want to mention something too, as long as I'm randomly throwing in these footnotes. There's a section in the Vehicle Code, section 15210. I think it's subsection P as in Paul, and subsection 8. Now, I might have gotten the 8 and the P reversed. And it specifically says, I can quote this almost word for word. It says, in the absence of a federal definition, the definitions in this code shall apply. Well, now, if you can find a federal definition, that throws the whole thing out. All the definitions in the Vehicle Code. Well, guess what? There is a federal definition. If you have a California driver's license and you look at the back of it in tiny print, we don't want to get your attention, okay? In tiny print, it says, this driver's license is only valid for driving a motor vehicle. It is not valid for driving any other, it is not valid for any other benefit. Well, there's a couple key words in there. What's a motor vehicle? Okay? Well, it turns out in Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 6 and subsection 10, those two sections work together. It says, and I'm kind of compressing them both into one sentence, it says that a motor vehicle is a self-propelled contrivance used to carry passengers, product, or cargo for hire. Okay? Is anybody paying you to travel? Then that car is not a motor vehicle. And you don't have a driver's license that covers that particular activity. The state is prohibited from imposing commercial rules on non-commercial activity. That's it, very simply. So you have this Vehicle Code section that says that in the absence of a federal definition, the California definition, Vehicle Code definition shall apply. All right? Now, why did they put that in there? If you look at it, at least in older copies of the Vehicle Code, it's kind of like a baby without a parent, okay? Because it's in bold type, all right? Different from the type of the others. And the way it's situated, it isn't quite part of that paragraph, and yet it is. We cite it that way, but why is that there? Well, I'll tell you why. And this is just my theory. I don't really know. However, I do know that the federal government provides funding to the states. Okay? In order to qualify for the funding, because it's all voluntary, in order to qualify for the funding, the state must conform to federal standards. So they put that little thing in there that says that if there is no federal standard, then we're going to use these definitions. But we do have a federal standard. It's Title 18, Section 31, subsection 6 and 10. Two subsections. So, now in my case, I have a commercial driver's license. My theory is this. We, the people, through the Constitution, authorize the state and the federal government to regulate commerce. Well, now, if I'm going to engage in commercial activity, why should I not obey the rules that I hired people to make up these rules? They made up the rules for commerce. Why shouldn't I obey them if I'm going to engage in commerce? I mean, why'd I hire them in the first place, right? I mean, theoretically hired him. Actually, obviously I didn't. But so when I'm driving a semi-truck, I obey all the rules. They have inspection stations, I go along with the program. If I'm in my own car, traveling, not engaged in commerce, that license doesn't matter. Even if I have one, it doesn't matter because I'm engaged in an activity that is non-commercial. How can you apply commercial rules to non-commercial activity? Can the vehicle code apply to swimming? Okay. No. So you're not engaged in commerce. So you can have a driver's license and still fight the issue based on the fact you're not in commerce.
If
Now
you're
you-
a plumber driving your truck, are you engaged in commercial activity?
If you're selling from your truck, yes. But if you're traveling to the work site, no. Okay, so the question is, if you're a plumber, are you subject in your truck? No, you're not subject so long as you're not doing business on the highway.
Where if you're a catering truck, that's a different story.
Catering truck, absolutely. That's a commercial vehicle. Yep. Yes.
Got cited for driving with an expired license, so I was gonna do trial by written declaration.
Wait a minute. Driving without a license?
Well, I was,
Expired license.
expired license,
Expired license.
yeah.
Oh, you mean like a fire truck?
No, his license was expired and he got cited.
Oh, well, they will, when it expires, they automatically say it's suspended. Okay? And they want to get you on form, not substance.
Right.
All right? Yeah. Well, theoretically, you could fight it on that basis because what good is a license if you never engage in commerce, right?
Right.
Well, it is good for one thing. It's a terrific cop control document. It keeps them nice. So that's a little side advantage. But I went 7 years without a driver's license, okay? And I happened to be in Nebraska, and I bought a truck. And that's all farming territory. And it happened that the truck had a farming license on it. And it says right in the state puts it right on there, not for hire. So I was on my way home in California. I got stopped by a cop 3 blocks from my house. They thought I was drunk because I was weaving. The truth was I had a loose front end, and I was always correcting it. But anyway, that never became an issue because this lady cop comes up to me and she says, German style, papers please, right? And by the way, in the 1940s, I remember seeing a movie where the German cop stopped the German citizen and said, papers please, and everybody in the audience laughed. That doesn't happen in America. Well, now it does. So anyway, she requested the papers, and I gave her the registration and the insurance. I'm a responsible person. I can't afford to pay for wrecks, so I took a chance with the insurance company, okay? They'd cover it. Well, I said to her, but I don't have a driver's license. She said, why not? And I said, well, because I'm not driving. So, and she was very friendly. I was friendly. Again, remember, the first thing is, how can I help you? Kind of thing. Keep it friendly. So she says, well, who was driving? A ghost? And so I said, no, but I said, look, I said, in your job, you've been trained to be very careful to use the right words, to say the right things, because you want good law enforcement. You want to make your charges stick. I said, I'm doing the same thing defensively. And I said, legally speaking, I was not driving. I was in control of the car. But driving is a commercial term. And I said, if you look at my license plate, it says not for hire. State message, not my message. Okay? Imprinted on the plate. So she went back, was gone for about 5 minutes, and I'm sitting there. And she came back, she gave me the paperwork, and she says, well, we're not going to cite you, but I cannot let you drive. I said, okay, thank you. Well, now look, there's theory and there's practice, right? So when she went, I didn't drive, and I didn't travel either. I called a friend of mine who came, drove it home. Well, drive is a commercial term, but anyway, he took it home for me, and then we walked back. It was close enough, so we walked back, got his car, and went. Okay, so I wasn't going to take a chance that when the cop left that they were going to hide and see if I really obeyed, whatever. So in practical terms, I'm not there to fight, I'm there to win. And sometimes if you do a little compromise, the universe is not perfect. And do you want to spend a lifetime fighting, or do you want to enjoy life? So I was willing to compromise a small point. Just like the Russian general was willing to compromise. Instead of going into full battle, he harassed them to death, but he gave way. He let them win the little battles along the way. Okay? Of course, he starved them out, too, because those supply lines were just too long to support a whole army. So you were saying?
Oh, yeah, well, I got stopped and they asked for my license, and I said...
By the way, do we have a microphone for him?
Yeah, right there. Somebody could grab that mic.
Oh.
And we can share.
No, he has.
Yeah.
This one?
No, we have another one.
Okay, that
There it is. Okay.
Push the switch on.
Right. Have the switch on.
Oh, sorry. Whoa. Okay.
And there's a man with power.
Yeah, I got stopped about a month ago because my tail light was out,
Yeah.
and they said, "Sir, I need to see your. Do you know why I stopped you? Because your tail light is out." I said,
Let me interrupt.
yeah.
There's a new code passed in California. They cannot ask you. They have to tell you first thing why they stopped you. That's just a recent change. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, he knew about that one. So,
No, this is just this year.
yeah, just about a month ago. I can't remember if it was this year or late last year, but he.
If it's January 1st.
Yeah,
after-
probably. I think it was within this last month. So,
By the way, they'll probably not obey that new law. However, it becomes a court factor if you ever do end up in court.
well, so I said, I don't wish to show you my license. And he said, sir, you have to show me your license. And then we went back and forth. And then he said, because he said, I said, can you, well, yeah, I said, am I suspected of committing a crime? And then he said, yes, your tail light is out. And so he was implying that was a crime. I said, no, that's a code. That's not a law. And so.
That's an infraction.
Yeah, okay. So we argued, and then he got another car to come, and we kept, but I was, like you said, I was friendly. I said, look, I don't mean anything. In fact, I'm just trying to, I don't think I should have to show you my light. It says, can you state your name? I said, I don't need to state my name. And then he said, finally he said, we've got another important call and you're holding us up. And I said, well, by all means, go to your other important call. And he finally said, sir, I'm letting you go. And so that, I thought, yeah, it felt pretty good. But I didn't, I wasn't sure, because he's trying to imply that my taillight being out was a violation of the law, but I said it was a code and not the law, and so I was not therefore suspected of committing a crime, so I shouldn't have to show my papers. So.
Okay, let me comment on that. Okay, how that should have been handled.
All right.
Okay, if you have a driver's license, show it to them.
Okay.
It is a common law rule that no one can go disguised upon the highway. Okay, so right away you were disguising yourself.
Okay.
All right, so don't do that. Plus, these little artificial kings out on the highway get offended, all right? And they have the guns.
That's true.
So you got to deal with reality too. All right. So then when he said, accused you of having a light burned out, you say, well, okay, thank you for letting me know. I'll get it fixed. Yeah, but but you embellished it with other stuff, see? and this is, you don't want to argue.
All right.
Later on, we'll talk about honor and dishonor, okay? And what you were doing is you were dishonoring him. All right, there's two ways to dishonor. When somebody makes a proposition to you, one way is simply go silent. Don't respond to the letter, don't just respond to the statement or whatever it is. The other way is to argue, and you were arguing with him, okay? So you don't argue. Now, you have to honor, make the assumption that the other person is acting in good faith, even though you know he's a dirty, rotten liar. You still make the assumption that he's in good faith. And so there are three ways to honor what he did. The first way is total agreement. Yeah, you're right, let's settle it now, whatever. And I'll pay the bill if whatever. The second way is to accept with conditions. For example, let's say that you want to sell me your house. And I'll say, okay, I'll buy it if you'll repaint it blue. You put the condition on it. It has to be painted blue. Okay? You're honoring his offer to sell, but you're not agreeing. You are agreeing with a condition. Satisfy the condition, it's a good move. Okay? The third way to honor him is to reject the proposal. What's the term? We'll run across it here. It's just a couple lines down on our little notepad here. But the third way is where you reject it. You get a bill from the doctor, and you see a line item that for a service that was never performed. So you're not saying the bill is wrong. What you're saying is that it needs correction.
Right.
Okay? So you accept the rest of the bill, but this one item is invalid, and so correct it. So you're giving them a chance to perform. So don't argue, don't stay silent. Okay?
Mark Allen got pulled over and he didn't have a tail light out, and it was for no good reason, and he was being accused of something, or
Well,
he wasn't even being accused of something.
I understand. Well, that's pretty obvious, but let's take a gray area where he thinks you're going too fast. Okay? Well, what you have to do is you have to accept it with honor. So, okay, the lights burned out. Okay, well, let's go back and look at it and see. That's a rejection without dishonor. Okay?
So is there a time when he's not required to show his identification? I guess that's the whole point.
Well, a public official has absolutely no authority to hassle you without cause. He's got to have some reasonable cause. And it turns out that if it's a misdemeanor, not a felony, he can't do that. If he observes the misdemeanor, then he can act on it. He can arrest for a misdemeanor. But he cannot arrest for a misdemeanor on suspicion. Whereas in a burglary case, that's a felony. He can arrest on that.
On suspicion.
And I'll give you an example of that. Personal. When I was 18 years old, I was kind of feisty, as I told you before, you know, an angry type. But nevertheless, I knew not to, you know, fight with the cop as such. I was hitchhiking. Now, at that time, I was the world's foremost authority on California hitchhiking laws because I actually studied it in the law library because I hitchhiked a lot. So I'm standing on the curb, which was legal, at a bus stop, which was legal, with my thumb out, okay? This cop comes along, and the first thing he wants me to do is show him my ID. And I said to him, and I was in honor, I said, I'll be happy to show me if you would give me a reason. Well, this was a dictatorial personality. It ended up, he arrested me. Now, I was dressed in a suit, pinstripe suit, with a vest, with school books, and my arm in a cast. And he arrested me on suspicion of burglary. Okay? Can do that with a felony. So I spent the night in jail. When he delivered me to the jail, he told the guard, I heard him. He got out of the car, he went up to the guard and told him how I had swore at him, I cussed him out and so forth. He's justifying them accepting me. And I spent the night, detective interviewed me the next day, and it was obvious that the way I was dressed, I was not the corner vulture or whatever, you know. And so they just released me, no hassle. Under California law, if you are arrested and released with no charges, that's technically called a detention. You have not been arrested. If anybody asks you, have you ever been arrested? The answer would be no in that case, even though they booked you and everything. Okay? At that time, I didn't have any money. Now, if I had had the money, or if that arrest was actually counted as an arrest, that cop would have been in trouble. But since it was a detention, and because I had no money, he got away. But I would have made a deal out of that. Okay? So, now what was your question?
The question was about him, when...
Oh yeah, false accusation.
Yeah.
False accusation. Well, there it is. False arrest. Okay? And I'm sure even a judge could see, you know, with me being in the kind of clothing I am, with the school books and the arm in a cast, you think I'd be out there being a burglar? Clean cut, you know, short haircut and so forth. It wouldn't have passed muster. There was another case. I got to tell you this story because it's a fun story. I was hitchhiking. It was a unique situation, easily misinterpreted. But nevertheless, this cop pulls up and he yells at me. He says, don't you know it's illegal to... Or no, he says, don't you know you can't hitchhike in California? And I said, no. When did they change the law? Because I was well-versed. Still 18, right? So, that irritated him, and he pulls over. And so I didn't wait for a signal. I just went ahead and walked over, you know. And then we had a little brief repeat, you might say. And he said it's always been against the law. And so he's starting to write up the ticket, you know. I showed him my ID and all that. So as he's writing it up, I'm saying to him, well, maybe you should look it up. You've got the vehicle code there. Why don't you look it up? Well, he knew what the law was. I kept talking, and he started weakening. So he pulls out the vehicle code, and he shoves it over toward me. He says, here, you look it up. I said, okay. I knew exactly where to look. And it says, basically, thou shalt not hitchhike or in the roadway. I said, I was on the curb. Is that a roadway? And no, why I said that. And then he said, well, see right there, it's against the law. So I said, okay, let's look up roadway. So we get to the definitions, and the roadway is somewhere where a car drives. I was not where a car drives, okay? So finally he says to me, he says, well, look, he says, if you really think you're right, you can bring it up with the sergeant. If he agrees with you, he can cancel the ticket. I said, nah. I said, we might as well go to court. We've gone this far. I'll sign it, you know. So he rips it apart, you know, gives me my copy and so forth, and then he's walking away. And as he walks away, I said, now there is a way you can win this ticket. He says, how's that? I said, when we get to court, you can lie.
And say, I wish the road was.
And he says, are you calling me a liar? I said, no, but I said, when we get to court, that's the only way you can win. Well, he took the bait. When we went to court, he told the truth. And the judge was all over him. He says, well, do you let cars drive on the island? Or on the, you know. And let me tell you something. If ever there was a guy who did not deserve my respect, it was him. Because he was the typical bully. You know, you give them a black eye, and suddenly they're nice guys. Even if they could overpower you, if they're bullies, true bullies, you give them a black eye, they back down. He was so sweet and apologetic.
So you guys became best friends after that? Are you still in contact with him?
I didn't get his name and address, no. No, but I mean, the guy was just like, you know, if he had said, okay, I screwed up, you know, whatever, I learned my lesson, fine. That would have been great. But the way this guy was, he was that wimpy type of person a bully becomes when you give him a black eye. So anyway, it was kind of fun, that ticket. Yes. You have a mic?
Grab the mic,
Alan,
yeah. Push the mic.
just don't put it too close to your mouth.
No, you're not on.
Now it's working.
There you go.
They say when you get a ticket, you can put above your autograph, you can put without prejudice.
Yes, you could do that. I think the cops are getting trained that without prejudice is okay. They used to object, and but I've noticed people have told me that they've written without prejudice. Do not put UD, okay, which you know stands for under duress. The Uniform Commercial Code specifically says that's section 1-305. Is that correct? 1-305? Very close to it. 305, 306, 307, somewhere in there. It specifically says that if you write without prejudice or under duress or equivalent, then you're preserving your rights. Okay? So these public officials, they're bureaucrats, okay? And they get very literal. So I only put without prejudice. I do not put under duress because in some ways that's offensive to them. It sounds like fighting words in a way. You're under duress. You're accusing them. But if you say without prejudice, that means without prejudging the situation before you get to a final judgment in court. Okay? So without prejudice. And they've learned to accept that. There's still some officials that, you know, they give you a hassle over it.
And just that, or your name and that?
Put the mic, put the
Just
mic
that?
on.
Just that, or your name and that?
Yeah, just without prejudice is good enough because you're not agreeing to the contract. And let me explain contracts because that leads into that thought. A contract, there's two kinds of contracts. The first kind that you're all familiar with is a negotiated contract. You get together, you work details out, and you come to your agreement, and then you perform according to the contract. That's called a simple contract. The other kind of contract is called an adhesion contract. This is a contract that's offered to you on a take it or leave it basis, no negotiating. A good example is an insurance contract, a rental contract, leasing contracts. They have tremendous detail. They try to cover every point. And the reason is because in an adhesion contract, if they don't cover the point and that point comes up, it's automatically the other side wins. Okay? So when the cop gives you a ticket, that is an adhesion contract. Now, what did he forget to tell you? Well, you do battle on this, and when you get to the end of the case and you win the judgment, then he has to pay, right? I mean, that's what you expect. So in an adhesion contract, he forgot to tell you how much he was supposed to pay you for the privilege of giving you the ticket. So you decide what it's worth. That's what accepting for value means. You accept the contract and you put a value on it. If he's wrong, he's got to pay. It's a valid contract, so pay. Okay?
So did you get money from the cop?
Of course not. They never pay. Okay? Remember, what did I say right at the beginning?
When?
You're not there
Your
for-
purpose is to get them, I didn't say this, come to think of it. Your purpose is to get them to leave you alone. That's what I call a real win. Okay? Freedom is not free. You may end up paying a fine, but because you burned their budget so bad, they're not going to touch you again. Okay? People have done this with property taxes. They've done it with traffic tickets. I have a friend, unfortunately, since deceased, but no cop would touch him. He'd go on the freeway, no license, all the time, never bothered. If they did stop him because they didn't know, they leave him alone. It was known in California Highway Patrol, it was known among all, don't touch this guy. He's burned us. Yeah, he's burned us too many times. He had 9,000 law books, and that was his legacy. I don't know what happened to the books because nobody could afford them, even at $1 a volume. And he had a tremendous library. So, anyway, but yeah, nobody would touch him because of that. And they messed with him one time too. He had a gun, had it on the seat, in open, and they wanted to know if he had a license to carry it. He said, "Well, the Constitution's my license." Second Amendment. Yeah. Well, he passed away before that got closed off, unfortunately. But anyhow, yes.
Yeah, on Rumble Chat, Plead makes a comment. When I told the deputy sheriff that I would sign the ticket under duress, he said he would take me directly to the magistrate, so I wrote without recourse.
He wrote without recourse. And then what happened?
And then you let him go.
Then he says, can you explain how it costs them money when you end up paying a fine?
That's a whole nother area. Now, everything I've been telling you is according to the surface evidence that I have. Okay? In other words, statutes, codes, case law, history, and so forth. So, tomorrow, we may have a person who really knows the subject in that area. But I'll give you a hint. Every time a case is set up, well, first of all, what is a court? Now, we have a definition of a court, but the definition they're using, the courts are all registered with an outfit called Dun & Bradstreet. You ever heard of Dun & Bradstreet? Anybody who has not heard of Dun & Bradstreet? Well, there must be somebody, right? Dun & Bradstreet is a central collection agency. They collect credit reports on all kinds of businesses. That's their primary focus, is businesses. Even non-businesses, such as nonprofit organizations, which in a sense are still a business. Anyway, the courts fill out a form for the Dun & Bradstreet. And when you look at the form, you can get copies of it. They try to hide it, by the way, but you can get copies. You'll find that the courts are registered as theaters. They're not
I heard they were banks or theaters.
they're not registered as banks, not with Dun & Bradstreet. They're not registered as government. They're registered as theaters. Okay?
Big show.
Yeah, it's a show. Okay? Really.
Broadway.
Not only that, but whenever you're arrested and charged with a crime, there's a bond.
Right.
Now, I don't understand anything about how this works, okay? I just know what I've heard. But hopefully tomorrow we'll have somebody here who's going to talk for maybe an hour or two, because I feel this is so important. What he's done, he's phenomenal. So I may learn a lot tomorrow. But anyhow, he has pushed this point. He's gotten cases dismissed and people out of jail. Why? Because the bond got paid. And it got paid out of the account that was created when you were born.
Yeah, that's what.
Uh-huh.
Notice of affidavit of discharge, that's what.
Well, whatever he does, I mean, and I know that there are three different forms. There are three different forms that you file with the IRS. And somehow it's havoc with them. Also, every judge is required to fill out what's called the 700 form. And the 700 form is a declaration of his income and assets, okay? Well, I know you're not going to believe me when I tell you this, but some of these judges lie. Like, maybe all of them, I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry. Bad news, but there was this one judge, who the opposition was Wells Fargo Bank. And now Wells Fargo Bank has had a little trouble with its reputation. It's had to pay some pretty hefty fines, like $100 million, stuff like that. But anyhow, so this judge is sitting on this case. Well, we got his 700 form, showed his assets, but we didn't stop there. We actually researched his background. Okay? Turned out his home was not listed. Not only that, it turned out that he got a loan of around $300,000 in order to buy the house. Right? Then, a 3 years later, the loan was rescinded. He didn't pay him back. And guess what? He got another loan for about $250,000. And then a couple years after that, it was rescinded. He got the loan with Wells Fargo. The same bank, okay? So it's possible that, yeah, maybe they do cheat a little bit.
Yeah. Was there cases for Wells
Yeah.
Fargo beforehand?
Well, this was a case where the ultimate judgment was against the individual. Magically, Wells Fargo won. And but we gave them so much trouble that even though they had the judgment, they said, well, we're not going to enforce it if you keep making the payments. That's the value of busting the budget or burning it. Okay? Again, it wasn't really a win because now they added the attorney's fees they had on top of it. And it came up to about I think somewhere around $100,000. But on the other hand, they decided we were too hot to handle. And it was a business. I mean, in a business, I've been in business many years myself, and you have a different attitude toward money. You know, when you're a working person with a job, you've got your income, you get paid, it's important to you whether or not you keep your money, you know. But in a business, what you have is you have money coming in, you have money coming out, you want to win more often than you lose. And the net difference is what you got. So you don't look at losses quite the same way that you would if you're an employee. And so that's what we do. You know, we just, here's a business, they're going to pay it, it's budgeted and so forth. But on the other hand, that person is now free with a stabilized system of cash flow. He's now free to develop his business, whereas before it was totally interfering. See? So in reality, even though it looks like he lost $100,000 added on top of the original deal, he'll make a lot more than that because he can make he's no longer fighting. You see? Got to be practical. Yes.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I had a question.
You're on?
I had a question about that when you were talking about traveling.
A little closer.
You were talking about traveling, and I witnessed a friend that was very knowledgeable about common law. He got pulled over for, let's say, speeding, and the officer wanted him to, get out of the car. He said, "I do not consent," and he said he was traveling, not driving. He said all the right things, and he didn't want to get out of the car, but when he did, finally, they said, "We're going to arrest you if you don't. We'll forcibly grab you out of the car,
Sure.
and we'll arrest you." So when he did voluntarily get out of the car, they put handcuffs on him.
Right.
And put him in his car.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he ultimately signed the ticket without prejudice, and I don't know if he ever got served, but to avoid, I mean, how do you really avoid? He was polite and nice, he did all the right things, and they still put handcuffs on him, and I even heard them talking about, oh, he's one of those sovereign citizens. And he said, I'm not a sovereign citizen, that's not the right term. And
Right.
so how do you avoid? Even though you're doing all the right stuff, they can still... The other thing was, because it was in wine country, they wanted him to do a sobriety test, and he said, "I do not consent." And so they said, "You have to, or we'll take you down to jail."
Yeah, they threaten you.
Yeah. So, and put handcuffs on you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering how.
Well, technically that's an arrest, okay? Even though they let him go. If he wanted to make hay out of that, he could. But do you want to be happy or what? What issues are worth fighting? You actually once you go into battle, you've assigned it to yourself a career. Okay, you have to make choices. I think that we should show some resistance, not on the street. I'd show it in the courts. I would not bother to teach somebody, a cop. I would not bother to teach a cop on the street. Now, what I have done in the past, like, I don't know why the cop stopped me. I was only doing 100 miles an hour, and an airplane tracked me and radioed down to him. But anyway, they did. So later on, it never got prosecuted because that was Northern California. I was in Southern California, and when they stopped me, they checked a warrant. There was a warrant out for my arrest, but they didn't want to pay the cost of transporting me up to Northern California. The ticket was only for speeding, okay? Nothing evil here other than a speeding ticket. But anyway.
I had a quick question about the...
I still don't know the answer.
We have 3 microphones, okay.
Let's see. Sorry about that. I had a question. I recently had a case, and I did some research on the judge at the Riverside Court, and I went to the Secretary of State to get his 700 form, and they didn't have it there. They said all the records were transferred over to the FFPC. I guess that's the place
San
of
Francisco Police Department, right?
no, where you do the voting stuff at. You know where the election stuff at?
Oh,
What's-
yeah, the federal,
They call it
commission, yeah.
Yeah. It's the FFPC, I think. And I was thinking I was reading something on this topic, and I want to pick your brain on it. Sorry about that there. Pick your brain on it. They say that you should, when you get a case or whatever, should you check these judges out before, because like you say, there's a lot of conflict of interest with a lot of the judges, and like I was going against this security company, and I was suspecting that the judge could have been getting some money from the surety company itself, or had something, campaign money or who knows what.
First of all, I don't think you'll get much money from the surety company. They'll fight that tooth and nail. But again, they can't avoid paying their attorneys. Okay, that's the key. You got to run their costs up. But you have to be genuine too. I mean, you just can't make frivolous motions. But every time you do make a motion, that's another $1,000 to $3,000, $5,000 spent trying to figure out what you're up to. So, yeah, it's. I don't know what to tell you, really. I mean, it's just you have these.
What do you think about that? You mentioned the 700 points.
Yeah, I mean, look, how big a battle you want to put up? I mean, you got to do research, and everybody is in the same position. We don't know. We know it might exist, but then how do you find it? What's the procedures? And there's so many laws on the book, even though they're not laws or statutes and codes. There's so many that, it's a chore just to research it. I spend $500 a year subscribing to a database so I can look up cases. But I can look up every single case the United States Supreme Court had right from the first day. Okay? Well, I can look up the published cases. And there's a lot of unpublished cases that still you can look up that way. So for me, I took my rights seriously, and I was willing to do battle. And since so many people were asking me questions, I didn't want to just tell them my opinion. I'd look up a case and say, okay, look up this case, and if it applies to you, then you can use it. If it doesn't apply, then don't use it, But yeah, it takes time. Look, a simple lawsuit, you're going to spend easily a month or 2 months just researching. It's a lifestyle. What's your price? It's not costing you money, but it's definitely costing time, effort, and aggravation. So I try to do the important things. If I get a parking ticket now, I just pay it, even though I know I'm right. I just pay it because I'm actually engaged in serious activity, in bigger cases. Not my case necessarily, but guiding somebody. And I tell people, this is a very important thing. Now, you acquire knowledge, people are going to start asking you questions, okay? And you're not an attorney. You cannot advise them, okay? I tell people, look, I'm no more interested in your case than you are, okay? It's a very important thing to say. And so I got some people who are real fighters, and unfortunately, I'm committed to them. So, and they call me a lot, and okay, I'm happy to help in that sense. I don't write papers anymore, and I don't critique papers either. It just takes too much time to do a good critique on a paper. But we all went through it. I went through it. You're all going to go through it if you're just starting. It's very frustrating. But if you're the kind of person who takes your rights seriously, it can be very rewarding. I hate writing papers, but when I've written one, I love it. I'm proud of my work because I try to be thorough. But yeah, That's the problem you have. It's a question of lifestyle. Just how far do you want to go? The more important the issue is, the more likely I'm going to do battle. You know, parking tickets are at the bottom of the list. If it was the only thing, I'd probably fight them, but you know, there's so many issues that are far more important. You know, confiscation of properties, you know, is a good example. Did you know, here's an interesting statistic. You're probably aware that cops will confiscate your money. If you have a lot of money, they stop you on the street, they take it.
Asset forfeiture.
Asset forfeiture, right. Something like 80% of the $20 bills have traces of drugs in them. And so, oh, the dog smelled drugs, you know? So, and then you fight it, and they will grudgingly give back for an out-of-court settlement because it costs money. You have to pay your own attorney. You can't collect for the attorney's cost. And so you end up getting maybe half back, you know. Somebody, like one case I read out, this guy took $20,000 out of his bank account, and he was going to buy a mobile home or something somewhere. He happened to get stopped. They took his money. Never did get it back.
How did they know?
Well, he got stopped, told him to get out of the car, search the car, that kind of thing, you know. Yeah, they found it, looked in there, here's $20,000 in cash. Well, you're not supposed to have cash. You're an ordinary human, right?
Do they have the right to search your car without your consent?
No, unless they arrest you. Then they still can't search their car, but they can inventory it.
And they get more to search your car later.
Of course. Yeah. So,
And I never get the answer to the question. So what do you do when you're pulled over like that? You're doing all the rules and doing all the right things.
what do you do when you're pulled over? Very simple. Understand, first of all, be friendly, okay? Put both hands on the edge of the door, not on the steering wheel. Put it on the edge of the door, maybe even stick them out a little ways so he knows you're not armed. Cops do get killed, okay? Every once in a while somebody pulls out a gun and kills them. So it's a reality he has to put up with. So my first number one task in my mind is to make the cop realize I'm not a threat to him. And the best way to make him realize you're not a threat is to be friendly. So I shock him with my first statement, which is, "Hi, how can I help you?" He's not here to help you, and you're not here to help him. But the first thing is attitude, and he senses that. So you want to put him on notice in a friendly way, in a genuine way, that you're friendly toward him. Okay? That's number one rule. Once he's at a point where he obviously is not concerned about you threatening him, okay, then I will start in on my routine. Okay, that's the only time. I got to get him calmed down first because it's a very tense moment when he walks up. So what I do is, that's the first thing. And then he says, "Papers, please," or words to that effect, because he got to remind us that we have friends in Germany. And so I give him the paperwork. Whatever he wants, it's okay. If he wants me to roll down the window, I roll down the window. He's not going to break the window, you know. If you make a fight out of it, he will. And so, remember, you have your rights. Rights cannot be given up voluntarily. I don't know if you're aware of that. Something that's a right is always your right. Okay? So, we might engage in conversation. You might say, "Do you know why I stopped you?" Even though the law has since changed in California. And I'm sorry, I said law when I mean statutes and codes, okay? But when you get him settled down, and if the conversation is friendly enough, I might even tell him the parking joke, you know? they like it. I have an arrest joke that I tell them. I'll have to remember what it was. Oh, yes. All right, I'll tell you this. There was a rich man. He was so rich that he had reporters following him around wherever he went. And I hope this doesn't ruin my joke and everybody hears it going out on the internet. I won't be able to tell it after a while. Anyway, so even though he was very, very rich, he was also very, very lonely. So he hired a bunch of scientists to make a clone for him. And it was great. It looked like him, walked like him, talked like him, had all the same interests he had, and they just got to be real pals. So everything was fine for several years. Then one day, the clone developed a genetic defect. It seemed like no matter where they were, or what they were doing, or who was around, even if reporters were around, he'd take his clothes all off. Well, that was embarrassing, especially since it looked like him. So he would yell at the clone, and the clone would apologize and promise not to do it again, but it would happen. So that kind of took the polish off of their friendship. So one day they were out for a walk, and the clone did it again. That was the last straw. He yelled at the clone, grabbed a hold of him, gave him a shove, and they were by a cliff, and the clone went over the cliff, and that was the end of the clone. Well, naturally, the cops came out. But it turned out that there was no law against killing clones. Well, they didn't want to let him get away with it, you know, so they held him there trying to figure out what to arrest him for. And finally, they arrested him. They arrested him for making an obscene clone fall. Yeah. So, anyway, that's my other arrest joke.
Yeah.
And they love it.
Hard to top that. Bill,
Yes.
jumping back to that previous discussion. Excuse me. Plead had a final statement. It says, without recourse is defined as having no financial liability with the signature. And he said, thank you for taking the question. And I want to thank, there's 56, there's many of the 58 people on the live stream, so I want to thank them for taking time out Saturday to tune in to Bill Thornton here.
Well, I just hope all you folks find this worthwhile. But, yeah, it's a struggle, and we all try to acquire whatever knowledge we can, but it is a struggle. And I get very flippant sometimes relating some of these stories, but behind these stories there is a tremendous amount of effort, a tremendous amount of pain, because when you are on the receiving end of these problems, you're trying to be perfect. You're trying to cover every point and so forth. And it really is a challenge. So it's a hard way to live. And that's why I'm retiring. Okay? And I do, when people call, I try to accommodate them. I find that the telephone load is just right. It's a good balance between living my life and helping others. You know, I just take phone calls and answer. If somebody has a very specific question, I don't want to go into the theory of law and all that. That's what this is for. But if somebody has a specific question, they're up against the wall on something, if I can come up with a suggestion, I'm happy to. No advice, just suggestions, you know. By the way, just as another footnote, I hope you like me sprinkling these footnotes in on the conversation, but the word client is a very dangerous word. If you have your own business, do not have clients. They are customers. Okay? Let me ask you a question. If you have a business, let's say you have an auto shop, why don't you call the people that come in patients? The doctors own the word patients. Okay? The attorneys own the word client. If somebody is your client, then you are responsible for what you tell them. And if something goes wrong, you could be sued over it. There was a paralegal one time that I heard about. They accused her of practicing law without a license. And she had all these clients. And every time the prosecutor used the word client, she would stop and say, "Objection, I have no clients. They were all customers." Okay? Customer, you're at arm's length. What you say, they take and decide for themselves whether or not they're going along with your suggestion. But advice, that puts you up a little higher on the responsibility chain or ladder. Okay? So, even in your yeah, worse if it's a written contract. You know, no, don't ever use the word client. Use the word customer. And there's other words I guess you could use, but you don't want to be responsible. Okay? Not when you can't be responsible. Somebody asks you for help, naturally if you're of normal spirit, you try to, help out, but always suggestions, and that's all I do. I give suggestions, and people record my calls or their calls to me all the time, okay? And as a general policy, that's okay with me, but I make it clear I'm just giving suggestions. Makes a difference.
In-N-Out, one of the restaurants uses guests,
Right.
You're our guest.
They have guests, sure. Not clients. The attorneys own the word client just like the doctors own the word patient.
That's right. When you go to Starbucks, they say, "Can I help the next guest?"
Yeah, Starbucks says, "Can I help the next guest?" Sure. Yeah, they must have had some good attorneys. Yeah. Mike?
Doesn't customer imply exchange of some sort, like monetary exchange of some sort?
The question is, does having a customer imply that there's...
The word customer, doesn't
Yeah.
that imply
No.
some sort of an exchange?
Well, yeah, you can have an exchange, but that's not like advice. Okay? You have freedom of speech, too. So, if somebody asks you a question, you give them an answer, but don't ever let it be classified as advice and that they're your client. Because that will sink you right there if it ever gets to court. Language is important. Speaking of language, what about resident? What is a resident? Okay? You're actually domiciled. Well, I can't say you're domiciled, but that's different from resident. When a doctor goes to college, he gets his MD degree at the end of the series, all the years he puts in, but he still cannot practice medicine. He has to go under some authoritative situation, such as a hospital, and do his residency there. Because what is a resident? A resident is somebody who is there for a specific purpose, and when he completes that purpose, he goes home. If you're a resident of California, that means your home is Washington, D.C., because you're a citizen. If you're a citizen of the United States, Washington, D.C. is your home. You're just a resident in California. That means you're here for a specific purpose and therefore subject to commercial laws. Okay?
Can we say that again?
I'll say it a different way. When you get a driver's license, they ask you, are you a resident of California? If you say yes, then that means you came from outside of California. They also ask you if you're a citizen. You say yes, that means your home is Washington, D.C., the federal government. You're a citizen of the United States, right? They don't ask you if you're a citizen of California. Right? And why do they ask you if you're a citizen of the United States? It's because the United States Constitution for the United States of America specifically authorizes the federal government to regulate interstate commerce. If you're from Washington, D.C., you came into California, you crossed the state line, didn't you? Interstate commerce, because you had a purpose. You're a resident.
I think airline pilots, usually many live in one area, but they're domiciled in another jurisdiction, another airport,
Right.
another city.
You can only have one domicile, but you can have multiple residences. That's been decided by the courts. So a domicile is where you live, and you're living there by right. When you're a resident, you're there by privilege. So that makes a difference.
So how do you get out of being a resident? Once you've already signed the papers,
Well,
you have to be,
I know.
Without prejudice, when I signed my driver's license,
Yeah. How do you get out of this being a resident? Well, you can sign without prejudice. That might help. I mean, theoretically it should help, but again, the real world is such that there are bullies in the world, who don't care what the rules are, and some of them are actually cops. So, okay, moving on here. Language and dictionaries. So that's what we've been talking about. Okay, what is a resident? What is a domicile? This is one of the trickiest ones. Those two words are used to ring you into their jurisdiction. So jurisdiction is a real issue. In court process, if you challenge jurisdiction, everything must stop, and they have to take time out to prove that they have jurisdiction. Okay? Do not do special appearance. Ever. Special appearance says you're going to the court and you're saying to the court, I don't think you have jurisdiction, but I want you to decide whether or not you have jurisdiction. That's what a special appearance is. And I've noticed, now maybe there's a reason, but I've noticed that most of the time, maybe always, the judge decides the court does have their jurisdiction. Okay? One of the realities. So, what language do you speak? In America, we speak 3 different languages. All 3 are called English. Okay? The lowest level is called street English, slang. Okay? That changes from moment to moment. You're using a word one day and then it disappears another day and so forth. So if you're in a room and this really hot chick walks in and gets every guy's attention, you might say, hey, she's really cool. Hot and cool means the same thing, hot and cool. Okay? Hot chick, cool chick. What's the difference? So that's slang. And the other language, second language, is what we sometimes call business English or formal English, English according to grammatical rules. Okay? And this is a language that's used among strangers. 2 people never met before, you talk to each other, you up your English and so you can be understood. The third English is sometimes called King's English or Court English or Legal English. Now, this is a very stable language. Formal English has a slow change over the centuries, but Legal English is pretty much unchanged. So, I'm trying to think of an example. But anyway, in Legal English, you have to be very sure what the word means. Now, in the library, you have the law library. There's a set of books, typically called words and phrases. And I don't know, there might be, I'm guessing, 25, 30 volumes of just, it's a super dictionary. And every page you'll find there's a word, and then you'll find a list of cases where they fought over the meaning of the word. I remember that the word to, spelled T-O, I think there was something like 3 full pages of cases where they argued over what that word means. So, legal English is very stable. Precedence applies, you know. Now, precedence is the process of saying, well, we had a decision in some court, and for consistency, we expect to have the same kind of decision in the current case. Okay? That's sometimes called res judicata. That means it was already decided. So you have to become aware. Now, what I did when I was first getting involved, I was reading the Constitution in the law library, and they had these books, and I pretended that every word I never heard of. And I looked, that's how I know why there were so many pages on the word to, T-O. But I looked up every word as though I had never seen it before and learned what the legal meaning was. Sometimes it isn't quite what we do in formal English, and especially if there's slang involved.
Definition of is according to Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Bill Clinton, when he said, well, that depends on what the definition of is. He was right. He was a lawyer, and he knew. And they had a tough one with that one. So.
Bill, I had a question.
Yes.
So when you're looking up definitions, do you use the Black Laws Dictionary to determine what those definitions mean?
I sure do. Yeah, I use those dictionaries a lot. I will say this, though. The 4th edition and earlier tends to give definitions based on law. The 5th edition and later tends to give definitions based on policy. Okay? Now, we're all taught that the pecking order is you have the Constitution on top, you have the statutes and codes. Well, no, you have the treaties. So you have the Constitution, then treaties, then the statutes, then codes, then policy. In the real world, the policy is the highest. The bureaucrats apply policy before they will apply code. And I have actually had a conflict with one clerk, and I knew what the law said, and I had it in writing. And he wasn't doing his job. And I said, well, here's the code. He refused to read it. He wouldn't read it. Policy, he wanted to hold his job. He gets fired for not following policy. He doesn't get fired for not following code. Well, he does, I guess, if it's serious. But I'm just saying that the pecking order is actually turned upside down.
Now, what about those treaties that have been in place prior to the Constitution being drafted?
Oh, yeah, there's a provision in the Constitution that all the obligations of the United States are carried forward. Yeah. They didn't go away. So, yeah.
Now, what about the concept that when you go...
microphone. He's got a mic.
What about...
It helps people.
What about the concept that in some cases when somebody is like you're accused of a criminal thing, right? And then you go to court and then talking about language, you say, I do not understand these proceedings. I'm here to settle a claim. Who's the person who has a claim against me? I don't understand anything. I don't understand legalese. I don't speak that language. So instead of learning the language, you go, I don't understand anything. I'm here to settle the claim. What about that take? What is your opinion on that?
Do you need an interpreter? That's what I would ask you if I were judge.
Uh,
Do you need an interpreter?
Yes.
I'm thinking of the answer.
In a civil case, you get to pay for the interpreter.
Oh.
Now,
If you say no, well, okay, you're responsible for whatever.
well, actually, if I said I don't understand, I said yeah, because I don't
Look,
speak
wait a
legalese.
minute, wait a minute. We're not interested in being fair. Okay? We're
Okay.
interested in following procedure. All right? Follow the procedure. It doesn't matter if it's unfair.
Okay.
Okay?
And what about the procedure of the fact that the person needs to understand the procedure? So if he doesn't understand, he's not entering into contract.
Well, then get an attorney. I'm playing judge now.
Right.
Okay? Get an attorney. Sir, this is dangerous territory for you. You need an attorney. You really should go see an attorney.
Right.
I can't advise you on the law. Not me as a judge. You're stuck.
Yeah. What if you say I don't need an attorney? I'm here as me.
Well, then deal with your ignorance. Look, I deal with attorneys all the time. You ever heard of an attorney at law?
Yeah.
He's not an attorney at law. He's an attorney in equity. Law means common law. They don't know common law, and yet they claim they know common law when they say they're an attorney at law. Well, they just removed my obligation to provide clarity in my writing. I just say, here's the law. You're an expert in law, so, I take you at your word. That's what the judge does to you if you go in there on that, the way you're suggesting.
Just wondering what you thought about it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the judge is not wondering. He knows what to do. Okay? It's okay with the judge if you lose.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. It's unfair. Yes, I acknowledge that. But you're stuck with this system. We have an adversarial system. That means that you do what you can on your side to win, and it's up to you to protect your rights. There's a legal maxim that says the law does not protect he who slumbers on his rights. And if you refuse to get help, like hiring an attorney, I'm speaking from a judge's point of view, then we're not going to protect you. It's a hard lesson of life. You can't expect somebody to jump in and save you. Okay? Got to do it yourself, or if you can't do it yourself, hire an expert. That's what attorneys are, or should be. Yeah. Okay, yeah. You say, oh, I thought you were indicating. All right. So, have we covered language? Now let's talk about honor and dishonor. In fact, I'll click on that because I need to reference that one. There are some quotes in here, but here's the quick summary right there. 3 ways to honor and 2 ways to dishonor. Okay? If you dishonor when you argue or you say in silence. On the other hand, if you want to honor, you have an accord and satisfaction. In other words, somebody sends you a bill and you pay it, it's settled. Okay, you've honored the bill. But then there's conditional acceptance, which we covered. And then finally, there's rejection without dishonor. There's an item on this bill that didn't happen. So it's a good bill. However, I can't pay it until you fix that item. That's very important. So, and then there's a procedure described. Now this is a procedure I think is no longer valid. And I'm going to have to revise this. What we do, well, let's see, is this, well, maybe it is valid. The thing is that you can enlist the aid of a notary. But California statutes say that a notary cannot do this process of collecting a bill unless he works for a financial institution. That used to be a common law function of notaries. And by the way, I have on the website several notary manuals going way back like 100 years or so. These manuals help to give you understanding of what a notary is really all about. The modern notaries are only taught certain specific things, but if they become aware of the other things, they can do that too. But some things that a notary can do are against state policy, even though it's legal and lawful. So
You've been one, you're reapplying, right?
yeah, I've been a notary and I'm reapplying.
And it's not difficult to become a notary. It's
Pardon?
not difficult to become a notary. It's just a matter of
Really, for $35, you can take a 6-hour course and then take the test, and
now you can do all this.
yeah. But there is a little glitch. Now, you see, going back to traffic tickets, around 1970 was when the concept of infractions was introduced. You see, it used to be a parking ticket was a misdemeanor. Okay? You could demand a jury trial. Well, the state was feeling very bad about that. They didn't want to pay for those jury trials, especially for parking tickets or speeding tickets or whatever. So they wanted to get rid of juries. That was the first proposal. No juries for traffic tickets, even though they were misdemeanors. And the opposition rose up and said, no way. You're not going to get rid of a jury for a misdemeanor. So they invented, back, I think it was in the 70s, they invented this idea that there were quasi-criminal, quasi-civil violations called infractions. And you could not have a jury for an infraction, but on the other hand, they cannot arrest you for an infraction. So you cannot be taken to jail for an infraction. So if you do an infraction and they do arrest you, you're entitled to a jury. Okay? All right. So that's the story on that little bit. Any questions? Do you want to take a break?
Were we gonna have lunch this, is it,
Is that what the Rumble people are asking, if we're having lunch?
maybe it's just a break, I don't know. I don't know if they're
Well,
ready for lunch yet, but
we should have had breaks by now, but
Theoretically, we should have had lunch.
I took command of your minds.
Well,
And
We started late.
yeah, we started late, and
Sure.
we used to stop every 2 hours, but we're not tied to that, we can go 3 hours on these dishes.
Yeah. Well,
Whatever people wanna do.
let's shall we take about an hour break? Is that okay? Or you want a half hour? Whatever.
Yeah, probably half an hour behind.
Yeah,
Half hour would be fine. Okay, so we shut off now. We'll come back.
we're on a pretty good roll there, yeah.
Yeah. It is now 2:26.
So let's call it 2:30.
Yeah. So back at 3
Okay.
Pacific Standard Time.
Common court is adjourned.
Correct. It is adjourned now.